Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about understanding that when you are doing a given amount of training volume, it is usually a good idea to split that volume across a couple of different exercises if your goal is to grow a muscle. Now, for people who are doing really high training volumes, this seems obvious. People who are doing, 15, 16, 20 sets a week for a muscle, it makes a lot of sense. But a lot of times, if we're doing, say, 10 sets, 12 sets, something like that, and we're training each muscle twice a week, a lot of times people don't think about those things. They come in and go, okay, well, I'm bench pressing for my chest. That should be enough. I'm squatting for my quads, and that should be enough. And for a novice lifter, that is generally the case, because they don't have a lot to think about. Anything for a novice is going to make them grow. Anything that makes them train hard, anything that has progressive overload, that puts a reasonable workload on a muscle, they're going to grow like a weed as long as they train well, eat enough, get enough sleep. They're going to tend to do well, and most novice programs are written very, very minimalist. But as we get a little more advanced, and I think particularly when we are trying to run sometimes not the highest volumes in the world, we do need to remember it's important to split our volume across a couple of exercises that work muscles through different functions. Because when you look at the way muscles work, you look at the anatomy, you look at the research on how different things get recruited, even research on muscle growth, it does kind of tend to show what bodybuilders figured out 50 years ago. And that's, if we work a muscle from a couple different angles, it does seem to grow a little bit better. And the reason for that is that, most muscles are not particularly complex, a bicep or a pec or whatever, but they usually do have at least one of their origins or insertions has a couple different points. Even really uncomplicated muscles like that, if you look at it, look at the bicep, right? Sure, both heads of the bicep connect at the same point in the elbow, but they don't connect at the same point in the shoulder. This would suggest that any movement towards the shoulder might have a little bit different. And so it does kind of make sense when you look at that to say, okay, there might be some slightly different functions involved there. Same thing with the chest. Yes, towards the armpit area where it inserts in the shoulder, yeah, it all kind of inserts in the same point. But that's not true towards the sternum. Right? The pectoral inserts all the way along the sternum from the top to the bottom across a wide area. And it's the same when you start looking at different muscles through the body. Okay, we look at different muscles through the body. You find this is the case pretty much everywhere, right? A lot of muscles, on one end of the muscle, have a few different points of insertion, 2 or more, or it's spread across a fairly wide area. So it does make sense that some of those fibers are going to have a little bit different functions, a little bit different angles. And if you're just trying to make the muscle grow, not a big deal. But if you're going, I would kind of like to get close to as much development as I could out of it, well, it makes a little more sense to do things that way. And then on top of that, when we start looking at different research, we do find certain exercises, even not just at those points of origin and insertion, we find that some exercises, just because of where the load is managed throughout the range of motion and the joint angles, do activate different muscle fibers at different ratios through different parts of the muscle, right? So even, different types of hamstring curls versus hip hinges, it's been noted that maybe the middle of the hamstring gets worked a little bit more than, say, the insertion points down near the knee. The same, with lats and pecs and triceps and all these different muscles. So you have that to think about. Then you have to think about the fact of individual functions. You look at a tricep and go, okay, anything that extends the elbow obviously works, the lateral and medial heads pretty effectively. But you need some extension of the shoulder to fully work the long head, which is that bigger head up near the top, near the armpit. Okay, so it makes sense to do some extensions that work that a little bit while pressing. And it doesn't matter whether that's bench pressing or dips or anything else, do tend to work the other a little better. So when you're doing things, it starts to make sense to say, okay, I should probably, work all these muscles from a couple different angles, at a minimum of 2. In some cases, it does make sense to work more than that, particularly something like a deltoid that has, a wider variety of functions, right? The deltoid has 3 completely different heads. They all do completely different things, even though it's one large muscle. So in that case, it might make sense to do even more. Right? Fortunately, the deltoid gets used in a lot of different exercises. But a perfect example, the tricep, it makes sense to do a press and an extension of some type if you're trying to really develop the muscle. Things like your back, it makes sense for lats and traps and things to do a vertical pull and a horizontal pull. Okay, it just makes sense. Hamstrings, when you look at the functions of the hamstring, both hip extension as well as flexion of the knee, it kind of makes sense that, if your goal is to maximally develop the hamstring, you may want to do an exercise of each type. The same thing when it comes to pectorals. Because of the wide number of origin points of the pec along the sternum, it makes a little bit of sense, right? It makes a little bit of sense to train a couple different angles of inclination. I personally like to do flat and then 45-degree incline, but I'm not saying that's what you have to do. You might be someone who maybe wants a shallower incline and a decline because your lower chest needs more work. Maybe you're someone who really needs a lot of upper chest, and so you might do just flat back benching with a barbell or dumbbells, and then put a heavy focus on incline work. But the point is the same. You really should probably work a couple different angles if you're trying to bring that up. Or maybe you really, really care about the lower chest. Maybe your front delts and upper chest have done well, and you just are not getting that whole lower chest. And so you might even do something extreme on the other end, like a decline and a weighted dip. All right. So again, you've got to look at what's going on. But at the end of the day, we are better off working at least 2 different exercises if for any given amount of volume you're doing. And that is what the research has shown, right? The only research that's looked at this, and again, I'm not saying it's the be-all, end-all. Exercise science research in a lot of ways is a long way to go. But even they found in the bit of studies that have looked at this, that if your training volume is split between 2 exercises, versus doing all the volume off of just one for a muscle, you tend to get a little bit more muscle growth, at least according to the limited data that we have. So what does that tell us? That tells us that people's experience in the real world from 40, 50 years ago is finally kind of being confirmed by the science. And we have a good idea of why it happens. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys and gals next time.